Hello, Josh here. Welcome to Toonstruck 2, Creepypasta. This one's about a guy who comes across CDs marking Toonstruck 2 and coming up with a lot of weird shit. Something like that. I don't know. Boring. Well, anyway, for those of you who do not know, Toonstruck is a game, a point-and-click adventure game for the PC released in the late 90s. Mid-90s. One of those. Anyway, it stars Christopher Lloyd, Tim Curry, and among other famous voice actors. Anyway, the premise of the game is like, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but instead of it being partially in the real world, the majority of it takes place in Toontown, and it's a game and not a movie. Pretty much obvious. Okay, here you go. Since as long as Dave can remember, adventure games have always been one of his passions. He loved it when he prepared a mummy for a beauty contest in Day of the Tentacle. He journeyed through the worlds of Strata and Torrance Passage, and was really amazed by the number of items one could find in a snake's stomach in Curse of Monkey Island. However, his all-time favorite was Toonstruck. It was an insane world with crazy clowns, misogynistic cows, a real-life actor who starred in Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and tons of dirty jokes. However, there was one bad thing about it: the completely unsatisfying ending. It belonged to the "to be continued" category, but there was never a sequel. Years ago, he learned about a Toonstruck 2, which was almost finished, but sadly never got released. He even discovered some sceneries and video footage on the net, but was never able to find the actual game, neither on torrents nor on eBay. One day, he was invited by a couple of his pals to a video game conference. To tell the truth, it was nothing special to him. Mostly action and 3D shooters, with the exception of some shady guys selling outdated console games. While Dave's pals were playing the new Call of Duty edition, he yawned constantly and looked at the clock, when suddenly he heard a voice calling him. He turned around to see another shady guy, perhaps the shadiest of them all. This one was a tall man in a dark raincoat and wide brim on his face, covered by scar and glasses. Everything, including his walking stick, seemed extremely old-fashioned, worn, and tattered, as if it came from the beginning of the last century. However, compared to the children dressed up as Hulk or Spider-Man and some Duke Nukem cosplayers, he seemed to be almost the epitome of normality. "I just wanted to offer you something." His voice was low and raspy, as if he had been screaming for hours. "What? Another NES game?" Dave was way too bored to be bothered by pointlessness. "No, something much better." As he put his hand in his enormous raincoat and took it out, Dave saw a CD case. "Toonstruck 2. Have you heard about it?" As excited as he was, Dave understood it could have been easily a fake. The disc case was blank, without any letters or images. It could equally be the test copy from the burst office, just an empty CD or virtually anything else. Therefore he asked, "How much is it?" The man seemed to smile under his scarf. "Just $2, kid. $2 and what?" "Nothing. Just $2. Dave suppressed an urge to scream out in excitement. "Just $2? Even if it was a phony, there was nothing to lose. This guy surely didn't look like a retired Virgin employee, so perhaps he bought a game for one of them or simply stole it. Okay, never mind. Even if it had been stolen from the company back in the late 1990s, nobody will ever learn about it! Alright, it's a deal. As he stepped closer to the man, he noticed something he didn't before. A small badge on his raincoat, in stark contrast to his appearance. It was bright with a colored whirlwind, just like the ones painted on the Toonstruck discs, and words, Mr. Tambourine Man. Dave had wanted to laugh, but instead, it scared him for some reason. He was so impatient that he didn't wait for his friends and got home by taxi instead. As he quickly took off his coat and sneakers, he launched his PC and put the disc inside. After a fairly usual installation program, unlike the first Toonstruck, it was adapted for modern systems and ran pretty smoothly on his Vista. The game started. The intro was identical to the first game, the same Virgin logo with the human eye, etc. But the menu screen was completely different. It had a big map of the whole Toon world, and the music was The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy by Tikshadski. He squealed in delight and pressed start. It started with the exact cutscene that concluded the original game. As soon as Drew was sucked into the cartoon world, it continued with him waking up in Xanadu and recovering his bottomless bag. Flux told him the situation over the communication device. Both Nefarious and Fluffy are still at large. Fluffy, disguised as King Hugh, is planning to conquer both the Toon and real world by using Briakrabrax's creating device. The only chance of stopping them could be using Drew's own imagination, represented by the legendary Lighthouse of Creativity on Sky Island. Drew could get there via the train of thought right from the place where he was standing, and Flux would meet him somewhere up in there. However, Flux gave him a shadowy warning about the unfortunate implications and the kind of evil you never encountered before. As he put it, even Nefarious and Fluffy are cuddly rabbits compared to this. Well, the latter actually is one. He gave a nervous chuckle through, though he seemed to be much more serious than ever before. After they finished the dialogue, Drew jumped up on a multicolored train full of Toon characters, drove up into the night sky, and finally arrived at the crossroads location. It was really captivating at first. It was clear that the game took on a Psychonauts-type direction, exploring both the beautiful and ugly sides of Drew's inner world. The middle path was the road to the lighthouse, but there was no way to get in. Drew needed two keys, the sweet key and the nasty key, which could be attained in any order. Dave started with the first one and chose the left path on the crossroads. The cutscene showed either Fluffy's or Nefarious's plans, with the latter once again sending his henchmen after Drew. After a while of gameplay, which included a duel with a Wild West cowboy and obtaining a sheriff's star, tricking the henchmen of Nefarious to steal their prosthesis, Lugnut's hearing aid, and Feedback's mouthpiece, there was a meeting with Van Gogh, Drew's idol, which almost resulted Drew becoming his model. However, Van Gogh was on the verge of hysterics because of his obvious hearing troubles. Drew solved the problem by giving him Lugnut's device, and in exchange, Van Gogh handed him the sweet key. It was sweet in the literal sense of the word, for it was a cake painted in the style of Van Gogh's Starry Night. At this point, Dave felt extremely exhausted, for he was already sitting behind a computer for several hours. However, his curiosity got the best of him, and he went on to explore the right path of the crossroads. It seemed even cooler than the good part of the island, since it included lots of horror movie spoofs. However, the spoofs got more and more serious as he proceeded. One scene had Drew sitting in the evil dentist chair as if he didn't react quickly enough. This ended in a quite gruesome Sierra-style death screen. This surely didn't help that it was accompanied by Henry Kusinak's Tango de Amor. Another was a room full of dummies that looked a bit similar to Spike. When Drew went to the other corner of the room, they began to whisper behind his back. Eventually, Drew found himself in a place called Tooniverse Club. There were zombies, bunnies, other monsters with bartenders, Baby Wolf himself, inappropriate attire, standing behind the counter pouring cocktails and of a suspiciously red hue. It certainly was neither Chablis nor the Purine wine. Dave clicked on the chair to sit down. Good evening, Mr. Blank. We haven't seen each other since that party of mine. Quite a remarkable coincidence, isn't it? The wolf greeted him. Suddenly, a nearby customer turned to Drew, and Dave saw it was Fluffy in the evening dress, holding a piece of cotton candy of the same carnindle tint. A close-up of Drew's face showed that he was just as shocked as was the player.
Hi, Drew,
she chirped. What the hell is happening? He screamed.
I think it's time I had to tell you something,
the rabbit replied in her
usual cheerful voice.
Then do it! Drew yelled. You've been on the wrong side all along, Drew.
With your talent, you've opened up a portal to this world, and we all use it to invade the real world. After our first plan failed, we had to lure you into the Toon world once more. All these rabbits are really anything but rabbits.
What are they?
This won't mean anything to you, but in fact they're shoggoths. This is the sort of thing humans are not meant to know, even former humans.
But what about Nefarious and his henchmen?
They never actually existed. We had to come up with an excuse for why you would help us. We can shift, remember?
Suddenly, the crazy dentist appeared on the club scene. He was rolling in his cot in front of him, and there was a real-life man tied up on the cot. Sam Schmaltz. The boss! What is he doing here?
He was on our side all along. Admit it, you hated all these rabbits he made you draw. Your hatred was like fuel to us. But now, we don't see him anymore. We have many other people from all around the world to help us.
What do you mean?
Just what you've always wanted, Drew. Now you're one of us, and you need this final step to complete this. Shut up, Drew!
The cutscene ended, and now Dave was in control once again. There was a gun from the Wild West in Drew's inventory. Without hesitation, Dave took it out and used it on Fluffy.
You're truly foolish and you think you can shoot a cigar.
Dave tried several other options, but there didn't seem to be one. Reluctantly, he used the gun on Sam. Drew put out a wide cowboy hat, which was in the inventory as well, looked at himself in the mirror, adjusted his hat a bit, and took out a gun and pointed it at Sam. Suddenly, the game was interrupted by a strike of lightning, and the power in the whole house went off. Astonished, Dave looked outside and saw a fallen power line. Strangely, it calmed him. Just an accident. Must be a coincidence, he thought to himself. He even put on his raincoat and went outside to see what had happened. But when he was trying to open the door handle suddenly broke off in his hand. Frightened, but still trying to remain calm, Dave took out his cell phone and called 911. Excuse me, my name is Dave Mitchell. There's a fallen power line near my house, and the electricity is off. My address is... What he heard was, in response, was this. Almost fainting, Dave hung up and called the police instead. This time the answer was the following. Dave's hands were shaking so hard that he dropped the cell phone and it crashed. But it didn't matter to him anymore. Suddenly, he heard something resembling the noise of a party, and though it was against all logical sense, he went to see what it was. The sounds were coming from his kitchen, but the kitchen was empty. He listened carefully and realized that the noise was from his fridge. Fully understanding the absurdity of the situation, he quietly sneaked to the fridge and suddenly opened it. When he saw, made him completely drop his jaw, for it was neither his ordinary fridge with food and drinks, nor anything resembling a party. Instead, he saw a dark and frost-covered tunnel heading somewhere he couldn't see, and the party noise was coming from the tunnel. Dave's current condition was beyond fear. He was now in the nothing-to-lose state. That's why he went into the hall and put on his winter hat, coat, and gloves, climbed inside the fridge, and went ahead. The tunnel was larger than expected. It must have been at least several hundreds meters long, with several forks. By pure intuition, without any explicit logic, Dave chose the right direction. He was too tired of being scared, so the only feeling guiding him now was the curiosity of an explorer. Startlingly, he saw a shimmering light in one of the paths. He followed it through the noise that was coming from the opposite direction, until he saw a metal door with a neon sign, Frank's Cyro Crip. He turned the doorknob and, surprisingly, unlike the one at his own house, it bulged. He entered what seemed to be a medical lab with the operation tables. It looked exactly like the ones from some old horror movie, with one difference. Instead of blood, there were traces of strange emerald green substance. Well, perhaps it was blood, just not human. He opened one of the drawers in the walls, and suddenly a strange, small, cartoony creature looking like a green zombie rabbit in a pink tie and a top hat jumped out. Dave recoiled in fright, but the creature seemed to be even more afraid of them he was, for it quickly jumped out of the side of the lab. Only then Dave noticed that the room had another exit. Once again hopeful, he hurried the doors almost as hastily as the creatures did and looked outside. Yes, it was a fresh air of the outside world. Hopeless, however, his happiness faded when he saw that it wasn't exactly the same world as the one he left. It was a dark, rainy street, and the first thing that he saw was a neon sign saying, "Cities." Very far off there were some psychedelic-colored hills with buildings that reminded him of utopian houses. Dave looked at the ground and noticed a paperback that seemed to have dropped by the creature. It was titled, "Who Flushed Ziggy Puffer?" or the official Toonstruck 2 hint book. He opened it to find the following text. "Hello, player. What's your name? You have entered my game. Drink with outer Scottish cheese, and then make a scout sneeze. Play with a misogynistic cow, get a suit for a carecrow, flush a fish in Zando, and it won't help you too. The only way to outside is finding all the keys I hide." It was followed by the list of keys needing to locate. It included sweet key, the nasty key, the silver key, the ruby key, the mystery key, the sludge key, the non-existent key, etc. The next pages included illustrations that looked like a maniac's version of Disney or Don Bluth's work. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Dave didn't remember anything from that point. Perhaps his journey in search of the keys could be a story from another time, or even constitute a book or an adventure game on its own. But all he remembered was a sudden, loud ringing sound. He woke up on his sofa in the living room and realized that the ringing came from the hallway. He ran to his door and let in his two pals, Gabe and Steve. The latter was a nerdy-looking short guy with glasses, and the former was pretty sporty, tall, and muscular. "Hi, Dog. How you feeling?" he asked.
Not bad, but
I just got up. You guys woke me up from a really bad dream," he responded.
Well, we will make sure everything is okay. Yesterday, you looked really bad by the end of the evening.
"What? But that was only a few hours before the end. I got a taxi and drove home."
"You must have been sleeping, dude. You were with us until the closing of the festival. You felt exhausted and almost sick. We even thought you ate something bad.
What? Didn't you guys see that vagrant looking man in a dark raincoat? He was wearing such a strange badge. Of course, Gabe didn't see him, and neither did Steve. This is almost convinced Dave that it was all part of a dream. They chatted for a while, snacked on some colas and chips, and finally Gabe and Steve left. This could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. Remember, Dave was almost convinced that everything was right, and he wanted to know for sure. He opened up his iPad and typed in Toonstruck 2 again, and there were some screenshots that he had seen several hundred times, and interviews he already knew by heart. But this time something else caught his attention. A really small link on one of the less known adventure sites entitled Toonstruck, The Dark Side of the Story. The link was dead and he had to use a Wayback Machine to open the page. According to the article, the story of Toonstruck was the darkest and most mysterious pages of adventure gaming history. It all started with some guy whose name was still unknown, but it surely wasn't Drew Blank, but who really was a genius animator once he got into an argument with his boss, who didn't give a green light for his new show. Starting from this point, this man started to shatter. He began to confuse his toon worlds with reality. He killed his boss and went on the run through all of the United States and Mexico, living in cheap motels and rented rooms and traveling by either train, by hitchhiking, or on foot. He took his sketchbook with him and continued drawing, all the while living in a mixed world of reality and surreal. His drawings were accompanied by written notes, and it was clear from them that he had created a whole world with a lot of characters and locations. Some of them were based on places he had been to and people he had met. For instance, the Wild West location was surely inspired by Mexico, while gloomy industrial districts of Malvovins could have been influenced by the ruins of Detroit. At the same time, others were just figments of his vivid imagination. It's still unknown whether he committed any more crimes during his period, but he was reported to having done some strange things, such as sending his drawings in text to non-existent addresses or leaving encrypted messages in his hotel rooms. At one hotel, he even used toothpaste to write a message on the mirror. Certain criminalists suggested that his paintings had their own code. Judging from the notes, he seemed to believe that he was trying to save the world from destruction by some known evil forces. He spoke about worldwide conspiracies and other strange things. Eventually, he was caught, proved insane, and deemed a mental case. His further fate is still unknown, and then there are equal possibilities of him either being dead by now, still locked up in the loony bin, or living a quiet life in some ho-dunk town in Arizona. However, the story was not over. A few years later, David Bishop, who worked at a Virgin subsidiary called Burst, had the idea for a game called Trouble in Toonland. It would have been a children's adventure about a boy named Daniel with his toon friend Gerald saving the Toonland from a black and white villain Ghastly Graham. Meanwhile, one of Virgin's executives saw this very sketchbook at an auction selling crime memorabilia and became obsessed with it. He bought it at the auction and desired to make an adventure game out of it. He convinced David to make some minor changes to the script, making it more appropriate for an adult audience. In fact, the first game was testing the waters, being mostly sweet with just a few nasty details like a misogynistic cow to test the audience reaction. It included very little of this guy's original sketches and was heavily reworked, changing all the names. They expected to make up for the financial disaster with the second installment, which would have been much darker, and including all the creepy things created by him. They didn't expect Christopher Lloyd to star in the game like that. That's why Drew Blank was turned into a toon by the end of the first game. But this wasn't enough to avoid a scandal. While they actually did manage to complete the work on Toonstruck 2, some of the employees were strongly against its release because it would be a very cruel joke for anyone who has played the first game, and they were not ready to take the responsibility for that. Finally, the release of the game was scrapped, and eventually both the game disc and the sketchbook were lost. The official comment on this project has been abandoned for financial reasons. They even took out a few screenshots from the most innocent part of the game and put them on the net. Everyone except the most devoted fans, just like myself until last night, Dave thought to himself, bought this and the story was concluded. The article was written by Mark Bergman, who used to work for Burst during these years. He surely wasn't a big shot there, for Dave didn't find any mentions of him anywhere on the net, but he was about to give up a title suddenly popped up. The disappearance of a former Virgin employee. Dave's heart skipped a beat when he opened it. Mark Bergman, age 36, was reported missing by his neighbor after he had driven away for a weekend and hadn't returned home for a week. Mr. Bergman, who used to be an employee of Burst, a subsidiary of Virgin, was currently working as a programmer in a small IT company in his home city. The article said that Mr. Bergman's car was later found crashed in the middle of the Nevada desert without anybody inside, and the police had no idea it had gotten there and what had happened to it. The seat cushions were torn, apparently by the claws of some beastly animal, but they didn't find any traces of blood. The only clue found at the scene was a small badge. The article included a photo of it, and it looked exactly like the one worn by a strange man, but it wasn't colored in the shades of green and had the word Gherkin printed on it. This piece was news. Was dated 25th of May 2004, about 3 weeks after publication of Bergman's article. As Dave read this, he heard something laugh behind his back. It was the strange man who sold him the game disc, but now he recognized that laugh. The laugh of a demented clown who tortured balloon animals. Spike. That was Toonstruck 2. Oh, where to start with this one? It's boring. It tries too hard. It's not creepy at all. And it overstays its welcome. You could tell at an instant for this one, the writer was just trying way too hard to try to come up with something creepy. And in the end, it became a boring story that was all over the place. Like, we spend a little bit with the character Dave, then we go to the game, back to Dave, then some information, made up information about what the author says about Toonstruck 2. And with that, I give this game an F. This pasta an F. Same difference. For being overly long, boring, and not interesting. If you want to find any more information on Toonstruck 2, I recommend going to either Wikipedia or Googling it. That's what I would recommend. It might be worth your time if you're interested. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Hopefully the next one ain't gonna be long. Bye!